One job, Nathan.
All right.
There we go.
Some of it.
Fabulous. Feels like ages since I've been here. And I thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate that I had to put it back by a week. So I'm really sorry about that. But really lovely to see that you still came. Well, it's not the first Thursday of the month. I know, breaking with tradition there. But I'm really excited about this one. Basically, I can't remember what I was looking for, but I ended up on the council website. There you go, an interesting way to spend 5 minutes. And I came across their list of blue plaques. And I thought, well, that's got talk written all over it, because there are a few that I drive past or I've seen, but I'm in the car and I'm never able to, well, I probably would get into lots of trouble if I just stopped and went and had a quick look. So I thought, brilliant. So I thought that would be the focus of tonight's talk. But there are 40 in total, and because you do want to get home at some point before the weekend, I've split it into two. So I'm going to do the first 20, that's a lie, I'm doing 19, but I'll explain why in a second. I'm doing 20, 19 tonight, and then in June I'll do the remaining 20. And I found it so interesting, and I have found out so much that I just never was aware of. I'm sure some of you will probably know the details to all 20, 19, but hopefully there's something new for you guys as well. So welcome to Oldham's Blue Plaques Part 1. I did give myself a couple of rules just because I'm conscious of time, which I'll probably break them all. I've only given background details if I really think it does help with context and understanding. But because it's my talk, if I decide to break that rule, I've broken it. And the first one I'm going to talk about does go on for quite a bit, but it's really interesting. Okay, so just to start, I thought I'd go through what is a blue plaque? How do we get one? Who are they for? The really key bit is that you have to be dead. So, I'm going to have to wait a little while, clearly.
You're on board.
Yeah, you have to have been dead for at least 20 years. So you also need to have made a notable contribution to society and have a building demonstrably identified with you. I live at number 51. All right. But the building has to be able to be seen from a public highway. So they've got rules. And where do they go? They are almost always attached to a building. There are some exceptions, and we'll see some in tonight's talk. They can be in parks and public spaces, but for the most part they are attached to a building. And the idea was started in London in 1866 by English Heritage. And the first blue plaque, so there were two erected in 1867, commemorating Lord Byron, the poet who died in 1824, and Napoleon III, nephew of the Napoleon, old Boney, who was President of France 1848 to 1852, Emperor of France 1852 until 87, when the French said they didn't want one after all, and his plaque commemorates a property in London he stayed at in 1848. Now the more eagle-eared of you may have heard, well, that went up in 1867 and he was still very much alive in 1870. He is the only exception to the you must be dead rule. He's the only one where a blue plaque has been installed when he was actually still alive. So if anybody else has designs on one, grand, but you have to pick it first, I'm afraid. All right. So number one on the list is the first one, the only one that I have written nothing about because I have absolutely no idea. It says on here, number one, Crompton Local Board, 13 Market Street, Shore. Nothing. I've googled every permutation of that. I mean, historians don't just Google, just one like that, but I had very little to go on there. I found nothing. I fully intended, it's been on my to-do list, to go to 13 Market Street, Shore, just to have a look and see what the plaque actually says, but I've just not had an opportunity, but I will, in case you're desperate to know what that is, what Crompton Local Board is. Some civic thing or local council, no doubt, but I will find out. So, the second plaque is a commemoration of the Peterloo Massacre Civic Centre in Oldham. Now obviously that took place in Manchester, This blue plaque commemorates 2 men from Chadderton who were killed at the Peterloo Massacre in 1819. And I would like to do a hopefully quick overview of the Peterloo Massacre and why it and those who died there deserve to be mentioned. So 1819, it was a tough time up north. It was tough in England as a whole, financially, economically, but the impact was particularly felt up in the north. Very high food prices following the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. And like I said, the issues were, it was nationwide, but particularly felt up in this area. Despite having a population of 130,000 at the time, it was the second largest city in England, Manchester had no member of parliament, and the whole of Lancashire only returned 2 MPs. Those of you at my talk on voting last year may remember, I covered the history of voting, and there was a hangover from when the boundaries were set hundreds of years previously, when Manchester had been a lot smaller, when the number of MPs was divvied out basically, and it made no allowance for if areas grew or if they got an awful lot smaller. So Oldham had no MP either. The population was much smaller than Manchester's, about 26,000 people at the time. Still a large increase from 12,000 only 19 years earlier. So people wanted representation. They were tired basically of these massive areas being told what to do by completely different people having no voice themselves. And contingents from all over the area marched to Manchester on August 16th, 1819 to have their voice heard. There were 60,000 people gathered in St Peter's Field, now St Peter's Square, many women and children included, and it was a very peaceful protest. None of those gathered had any weapons. And the highlight of the day was a speech to be given around 1 p.m. by Henry Hunt. He was a radical speaker calling for parliamentary reform. He wanted universal suffrage, slightly ahead of his time, and he ordered that those attending should be armed with no other weapon but that of a self-approving conscience. Okay. Magistrates in Manchester, however, were not happy about this gathering. They hadn't approved it in the first place, and they were watching from an overlooking building. And after about 2 hours, they had enough and they gave orders that the crowd should be dispersed. So they called for the Manchester and Salford Yeomanry to come in and do so, who massively overplayed their piece of the action. They charged into the crowd, they were armed with sabres. Accounts do differ, but it appears that 18 people were killed and several hundred injured. This is a representation of the cavalry coming in that was produced very, very shortly afterwards. And so this is where our Oldham Blue Plaque comes into it. So the plaque at the Civic Centre commemorates John Ashton, he was 42 and a weaver, and Thomas Buckley, who was 62 and a gardener. They set off with the Chadderton contingent from the Dog Inn, which in itself has a claim to fame, oldest licensed premises in Chadderton, first licensed in 1750. And that was one of the meeting places for those marching from Chadderton to Manchester. So John and Thomas were both killed when the cavalry was ordered to charge into the crowd to disperse the protest. And it's worth mentioning, he's not mentioned on any blue plaque, but there was another Oldham man, John Lees. Of course there was a Lees at Peterloo. Now he died of injuries sustained at Peterloo 3 weeks later, and he is the only victim who was actually authorised to have an inquest held into the cause of his death. But unsurprisingly, before a verdict was reached, the authorities shut it down because the government was fully behind the decision to break up the protest and didn't want a potential verdict blaming the local magistrates, local government. So that is that blue plaque. The next one commemorates Winston Churchill on Old Town Hall in Oldham. You know this one? So in 1899, Winston Churchill stood for election in Oldham, came up, schmoozed, met the people, vote for me, and he lost. Sorry, Winston. So remember, Oldham didn't have any MPs in 1819 when the Peterloo Massacre happened, but this changed with the 1832 Representation of the People Act, also known as the Reform Act, which made huge changes to the electoral system, and from that point Oldham returned 2 MPs. In 1899, both MPs were Tory. One, Robert Ascroft, died, and the other, James Oswald, resigned due to ill health. So Winston stood for election as a Tory MP, along with another Conservative, James Maudsley, but they were both defeated, and 2 Liberal MPs were elected instead. So Winston went back to his day job. He was a war correspondent. He went to South Africa to cover the Boer War. He was taken prisoner when a train he was travelling on was ambushed. Winston was credited with helping many people on the train escape before he was taken captive. After a few days, he managed to escape, and he was assisted by a group of men, including an Oldham man called Dan Dewsnap, a miner who was working out there, and he hid Winston down a mine for a week. Yeah, it's true. So Winston returned to Oldham in July 1900 and was given a very warm welcome. He gave a talk, he recounted the tale of his escape, and the assistance given to him by Mr. Dewsnap went down very well. So, thoroughly taken with how well he was received, Winston decided to stand again, and in the 1900 general election was returned as an MP for Oldham. As a Tory, and he was Oldham's MP until 1903. However, in 1904, he crossed the floor and joined the Liberal opposition. Yeah. And many historians have credited his decision with being MP for Oldham. Winston came from an incredibly wealthy and privileged background, a natural fit, some might say, for the Conservative Party. But seeing firsthand the poverty and the deprivation in his constituency may have led to the change in his political leanings. Okay, on to our next blue plaque. It's a rather distinguished gentleman. This is Lord Rhodes, Lord Hervey Rhodes, not Harvey, Hervey, and had to tell me to autocorrect that a million times. So he was born in Greenfield, Saddleworth in August 1895, died in Oldham in September 1987. Born into a poor family, worked in the wool industry when he was young, and in later life owned a woolen mill in Delft. I've not been able to find out which mill he owned, but there was a family interest in Slapcote Mill in Delft, dated to 1781. It was a Slapcote Mill, I think once it's been kind of decommissioned. It closed in 1956 and it's now been converted into residential housing. So during World War I, Lord Rhodes, he served in the army, later moving into the Royal Flying Corps, where he claimed 5 enemy aircraft, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is considered the highest award for extraordinary aerial achievement. He was wounded in September 1918 and left with a permanent limb. He left the Flying Corps, concentrated on his woolen mill business. During World War II, he was a commanding officer of the local Defence League in Saddleworth, better known as the Home Guards, and after the war, failed to be elected as an MP in the 1945 general election, was elected in October that year in a by-election, and served as a Member of Parliament until 1964 when he became a life peer. And there's still a Lord Rhodes Award given annually at Saddleworth School to honour pupils' achievements, reflecting the students who have excelled like Lord Rhodes and who clearly didn't live a very boring life. Okay, William Walton. Heard of him? Yes? Okay. He is. I could have chosen any photo because there's lots of him, but I like this one. I was like, come on, if I can get a koala in on the action, I'm going to. Okay? So he was indeed a composer, the son of musical parents. They were singers and songwriters themselves who encouraged young William in his own musical career. I'm sorry, his blue plaque is at 93 Werneth Hall Road in Oldham. So born in Oldham in 1902, very clear talent from a young age. He studied at Christ Church Cathedral School in Oxford, went there when he was 16, one of the youngest students to ever graduate from there. He kind of had mixed fortunes as a composer. Best known for the orchestral music he wrote, he composed one opera, Troilus and Cressida, politely described as making little impact in opera houses. I think that was polite. But I mean, he certainly didn't set the operatic world alight. He seems to have gone in and out of fashion. He wrote in many different musical genres, opera, film scores, and he composed for every single Laurence Olivier film apart from The Prince and the Shogun. Best known for composing the music for Olivier's 1955 adaptation of Richard III. Okay, not sure that'll ever be a pub quiz question, but you never know. After leaving Christchurch Cathedral School, he lived for many years. So I don't know if you've heard of them, the Sitwell family. They were very much the it crowd of their day. There were siblings, Edith Osbert and Sakevaro, that's how it's pronounced. Very avant-garde, very eccentric, very, I believe the girls wore trousers. That's how eccentric and mad they were back in the day. And later in life, he moved with his wife to the Italian island of Ischia, where he died in 1983. Now, I've got, because I thought I'd play a little bit of his music. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'll give it a try. See if any of you can recognise this, if I can get it to play. Oh, you're offline. Did Matt say there was Wi-Fi?
Yeah, William Walton concert she watched, what's it called? Well, I see him.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
I'd never heard of him.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of him. I'll see if I can get that on at the end, because it's quite a nice little piece. But it's called Popular Song. It was actually a theme tune to a BBC TV programme. Anybody know? It's called Face the Music. And it ran 1966 to 1984. So yeah, I'll see if I can get that on. The man did say there was Wi-Fi here now, so I'll see if I can get that up. Okay, so next one. The creation of Alexandra Park during the cotton famine. And that's in Alexandra Park, excuse me, on the North Lodge. So in 1861, the slave-owning southern states of America wanted to split from the rest of the United States. The rest of the states that pretty much opposed slave ownership, and the South wanted to become an independent country themselves. So Britain at this time was a huge player in the world stage. I think Britain owned most of the world at this time. And to ensure that Britain didn't support the northern states in this dispute, what would become the American Civil War, the southern states stopped exporting cotton to Britain, hoping this would destabilise the British economy, force Britain to support the southern states to get the supply of cotton going again. So it didn't really go to plan, because then the American War proper broke out. Southern states were blockaded by the Union and cotton exports couldn't get out anyway. So at first the lack of cotton being exported didn't have a huge impact because there was plenty of stock in British warehouses. British companies had routinely bought more than they needed to always have that back stock, always just in case there was a slight delay in getting more. And the British companies used their back stock, didn't worry too much about it at first. As we tend to do with wars here, we think it'll be over soon. It's all going to be fine. But by 1862, cotton mills were being closed. Workers were being laid off. About 1/3 of cotton mill workers in Oldham lost their jobs, had to rely on poor relief. Many others left to go and work in mills in Yorkshire. Quite a few, the hatting industry that really sprang up, Hyde, Stockport, a lot of people went to go and work there instead. But in July 1863, a law came in that allowed local authorities to borrow money to spend on public works. And so Oldham took advantage of this, borrowed money to provide gainful employment to the unemployed cotton mill workers to build Alexandra Park. So the land was purchased in 1863 to construct a park, the condition being that unemployed textile workers were to be employed to do it. And it opened on 28th of August Something's beeping.
That's the mother open.
Oh dear. This doesn't seem to be...
There you
Oh,
go.
yeah.
Oh well, I'll just do it this way instead. Oh,
Pass it in, that's all.
thank you. So Alexandra Park. So yes, 28th of August, 1965.
Sorry.
But in 1864, cotton imports were reinstated and the mills began to operate once more. Okay, so the next blue plaque
Works for me.
works for you, brilliant, thank you. Work for me. The next blue plaque is at Leesbrook Mill in Lees and it commemorates Annie Kenny. Annie. Of course she's got a blue plaque. So again, those of you regulars at my talks, I've spoken a few times about Annie. Born in 1879, one of 11 children, born and grew up in Spring Head, and at the age of 10 went to work in a cotton mill. Always a particularly pleasant place for children to work, not, working under the machinery because they were so small. And she lost a finger that was ripped off by a spinning bobby, and she went full time at the mill when she was 13. So in 1905, at the age of 26, Annie heard Christabel Pankhurst speak at an independent Labour meeting in Manchester and was massively inspired, became a member pretty much immediately of the women's suffrage movement. She met Christabel's mum, Emmeline, a short while after, big impact on Annie. She collected leaflets on women's suffrage to distribute to women at the mills in Oldham. And throughout her suffragette career, she was arrested 13 times. Not messing about, clearly not content just to hand out leaflets. Having become involved with the women's suffrage in 1905, it was October that year that she was arrested for the first time. She and Christabel attended a protest rally at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, where Winston Churchill, one of the speakers for the Liberal Party, I remember, was speaking, and Annie interrupted, constantly asking, would the Liberal Party give women the vote? So they were kicked out from the meeting, and due to their behaviour, kicking and spitting at policemen, they were arrested and sentenced to 3 days in Strangeways after they refused to pay a fine of 5 shillings. So there are various photos of Annie. This is one of my absolute favourites. I don't know which arrest this was. She was arrested 13 times. But just look at that face.
Do what you want with me.
Yeah. He doesn't look very impressed. He's just got a look of reconsidering some of his life choices. He's like, come with me.
Yeah.
And she's just there going, have it. Have it. It's one of my all-time favourite photos. I think it's brilliant. So she was arrested again in June the following year for activism. She dressed as a mill girl, and she led a group of women to the home of Herbert Asquith, Chancellor of the Exchequer, future Prime Minister. She rang the doorbell incessantly and was arrested. So given the choice of a prison sentence or stopping campaigning for 12 months, which do you think she chose? I'll do a bit of bird.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 months in Holloway prison. So in 1912, she moved into a senior position of the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, eventually becoming its deputy. Christabel Pankhurst was under threat of arrest, so Christabel moved to France, and every week Annie would go to France to receive orders, and she would quite often go in disguise. It was like, glasses, false nose, moustache or something, I don't know. But I love it. She went every week to receive orders. 1913, she was charged with incitement to riot and sentenced to 18 months in Maidstone prison, and she went on hunger strike, became the first suffragette to be released under the Cat and Mouse Act. That was the suffragette's nickname for the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act of 1913. So basically, if a prisoner became ill, particularly due to hunger strike or forced feeding, they were released to recover, and then once they were better, straight back to prison. And it was essentially, the prisons didn't want people dying inside unnecessarily. I think there was a bit too much paperwork perhaps involved. It certainly wasn't compassionate grounds, and lots of suffragettes were in and out. And being suffragettes, they decided to celebrate this, and they awarded the Hunger Strike Medal for Valour, and Annie was the first recipient of this. Once World War I broke out, campaigning for suffrage was suspended, and so, the suffragettes took on, or the ladies who'd worked for suffrage took on other things they were supposed to do. So Annie went to America on a lecture tour, returned to England, gave talks encouraging women to become munitions workers. In 1915, she went to Australia, where she helped the Prime Minister in a referendum campaign on conscription, incredibly well challenged. Came back to England, again helped with the recruitment of women to work in munitions factories for the remainder of the war. After the war and women obtaining the vote, Annie retired from public life. She didn't really do much speaking about her time as a suffragette. She married, she had a son, moved to Letchworth in Hertfordshire. She did write a memoir in 1924, but she really shied away from giving interviews. She wasn't interested in that side of it. And she died in 1953. She was a remarkable woman. I think she's absolutely wonderful. She gave everything fighting for women's suffrage. And we have Annie's statue in Oldham Town Centre. I share a birthday with her. She's older than me.
Just a bit.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
Just a bit. Okay, so number 8. Helen Bradley. Who knows Helen Bradley? And I forgot the book.
Helen Bradley, what school was she?
Yeah.
Councillor.
No, not a counsellor. She is.
Yeah.
She's an artist. I had never heard it. It's the same. I love doing this talk. I love researching it. I'd never heard of her. So yes, at 3 Princess Street in Leeds, Helen. So she was born in Leeds in 1900, and they're amazing. I've got some examples. I love them. She drew about her childhood in Oldham, and later she also wrote illustrated stories. Illustrated stories. So she attended what was then Oldham Art School, now Oldham College. She attended from the age of 13, but she actually didn't start really painting seriously until she was in her 60s. She met Lowry in the 1960s, and he really encouraged her in her painting. And so one of the things I love about Helen's paintings, she had some characters that she included in many, if not all, one in particular of her paintings. There was Miss Carter, who always wore pink. There was Mr. Taylor, the bank manager, and 2 little doggies, Jip and Barney. And so this is one of... Oh, there's Helen.
Aww.
So this is Mumpost Station. Got Miss Carter. So Mr. Taylor, the bank manager, can't make his mind up really, because Marcus has bought me a couple of the illustrated books because I fell in love with her paintings. And he's a bit of a... So Helen, she's writing about her childhood. She had about 73,000 aunts. I got very confused as to who was on who. And Mr. Taylor seems to either, hello, one of the aunts, or Miss Carter, but Miss Carter very much fancies Mr. Taylor. And I've never found out yet who won the bank manager's heart. And we've got this one on Saturday evenings, Mothers Sang. Where are the doggies? I just think they are so charming, but just so evocative of Edwardian Oldham. And I think they are lovely. Like I said, I'd never heard of her before I started doing research onto the Blue Plaques, and now I've got quite a bit of Helen Bradley in the house. So Gallery Oldham has several of her paintings. Some were left in a bequest about 10 years ago by a couple called Derek and Elizabeth Jewell. Not from Oldham, but they're a married couple who specialised in collecting Helen Bradley paintings, and in their wills they wanted Helen's work to be back in her hometown, so that's at Gallery Oldham as well. So the record price currently for a Bradley picture is just over £94,000.
Wow.
Paid in Christie's in London in 2007 for this one, Our First Morning in Blackpool.
Oh, nice.
I think they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You've got the doggies again. I think that might be Miss Carter. Miss Carter's in every single one. Mr. Taylor isn't. But yeah, absolutely love them. Okay, so number 9, site of Oldham Royal Infirmary, which is at Oldham Sixth Form College. Oldham Sixth Form College is where it stands, and that's where the plaque is. So the original Oldham Infirmary was actually a workhouse infirmary established around 1870 as part of Oldham Union Workhouse, which itself opened in 1851. The infirmary closed in 1989, and the site is used, as I said, by Oldham Sixth Form College. And that's pretty much that. Okay, number 10, Yates's Wine Lodge.
Ooh.
There we go.
Yeah. Sawdust on the floor. Keep it up.
It is, yes. So 8A High Street, aka Mackie D's. So in the 1860s, a lady called Mary Addison bought the 18th century Angel Hotel in Oldham, which dated to at least 1770, if not earlier, and that was on the site of 8A High Street. In 1884, her nephews Peter and Simon, along with her niece, their sister Susanna, formed Yates Brothers and Company, and in that same year opened the world's first Yates's Wine Lodge at the Angel Hotel. So within 20 years, they had opened a total of 20 Yates's wine lodges in Oldham and the surrounding area, and at one point there were 3 in Oldham itself. And the real selling point of Yates's Wine Lodge was that it specialised in wine. That was quite unusual at the time. I don't think the wine was necessarily the highest quality, but it was wine. And to be fair, that's all I care about. You know, is it wine? That'll do, thank you very much. It was novel. The prices were purposefully low, so working men and women could afford them. And at its peak, the company had 170 pubs across Great Britain. So information is a bit conflicting about how many are currently in operation. I think it's around about 23 that are still Yates's, but many became or were bought by whoever owned Slug and Lettuce. So there's about 70 all in. So if you see a Slug and Lettuce, chances are that was a Yates's. So the ethos of the early Yates's wine lodges was to offer low-cost alcohol for working people. I mean, I think we could all agree that sounds pretty good. But, excuse me, Peter was teetotal. He encouraged the growth of alcohol-free bars. I don't think they did so well in Oldham. His personal motto was moderation in true temperance. And to be fair, he was a few days shy of 90 when he died. Maybe there is something to say for refraining from drink. Don't know. But not that the current day Yates's pubs would know. Their slogan is all day long. Poor Peter is probably spinning in his grave. Oh yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting the slides now. There we go, McDonald's.
Yeah.
And it's a bit... So I took these on a very rainy day last year. But yeah, it's not so obvious, but there we go. First Yates's Wine Lodge opened in Oldham in 1884. I wonder if anybody going to McDonald's notices that. I should stand there like, have a look. Okay, Henry Platt. This blue plaque is at the Smithy, Bridge House, Dubcross, and I did have to pinch this, so it's not great quality. I wasn't able to get out there. So there is a Smithy there. But look at that whacking blue plaque. They're making sure that can be seen from a road.
Yeah.
So Henry Platt, born in Delft in 1793, died in 1842. His father, John Platt, was a machine maker and auctioneer who lived in Delft. The family had lived in that area for several generations. So in the 1820s, Henry took over his dad's business and started making wool processing machinery. And I'll come back to that shortly. Henry was regarded as a very gifted engineer with the ability to improve any machine he laid his hands on, apparently, so a very useful man to know. Married a lady called Sarah Whitehead in 1815, and they had a whopping 10 children. I know, 4 sons and 2 daughters. So in 1824, Henry partnered with, excuse me, Elijah Hibbert, and their firm, Hibbert and Platt, opened Hertford Works in 1829-1830, moving to Oldham to take advantage of its growth through the Industrial Revolution. And I was supposed to have a slide there, which I don't. I did have a photo of the works in its prime, but I don't now. It's going to be somewhere else. We'll find it. We'll find it later. But Hertford Works was located at Bottom Moor. There we go. And Henry and his family lived just up Huddersfield Road, where the big Tesco is on Huddersfield Road. They had a property there called Ferry Bank, and that's where they lived. And so I mentioned they had 10 children, including 4 sons. So 2 of these sons, James and John, had very distinguished lives of their own and featured in my recent talk about Platt brothers.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's for another time. They don't have a blue plaque. Not yet. This one I really like. Ben Briley. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, Ben
You know him?
There's a book called The Ben Briley.
There was. It's closed down now. But yes, Ben Briley. So he was a dialect writer of stories and poems, born in 1825 in Fellsworth. And his plaque is at 466 Oldham Road in Fellsworth. So his birthplace was the Rocks, seen here in a 1925 drawing. This appeared in the Oldham Chronicle to mark the centenary of his birth. Excuse me. In 1825. Excuse me. His father was a soldier who'd been part of the Fellsworth contingent who went to Peterloo. His mother, Esther, was a singer. Now, apparently Ben and his mother were very close, so close that he vowed never to marry a woman unless she too was called Esther. Whether that is solid fact or not, he did marry a lady called Esther. So, who knows? So Ben wrote in the Lancashire dialect. He didn't write solely in dialect. Apparently he was a master of the English language, but that is certainly what he was, and to some extent still is, best known for. So he was a handloom weaver by trade, like his father when he retired from soldiery. He was self-taught, first began to publish in his 30s. He was sub-editor of Oldham Times for a number of years and also served 6 years as a member of Manchester City Council. So, I mean, I tried to decipher and read out loud some of his work and absolutely no avail. So this is one of his poems from The Waver of Wellbrook. If anybody wants to have a stab, I would love it if someone could read that in proper Lancashire. Any volunteers?
There's only one.
Oh, come on. Do you want to give it a try?
I'm not from Lancashire.
Yeah, but you've got the accent.
Don't make me do it. You're... No, I can't. I can't get past the first word. But, you know...
You may gamble and sport till you do.
You may gamble and sport till you do.
Well, a quiet, always milk, a good wife and a book. He's more to likings than me. I'm getting it wrong.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Pickers and pins, and me well to the shins, me linder and shuttle and ye old duck. Me treadles and sticks, me weight ropes and bricks. For life, said the waver at Wellbrook.
Wow! Stop! Round of applause for that. Fantastic. You know, it's like a completely different language. But, you know, I think it's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. And so he wrote a lot about Daisy Nook. He visited America then in 1880, and he wrote extensively about his travels there in the Lancashire dialect,
Wow.
which I think is absolutely brilliant. Went to Washington. Saw Big Needle. He died in Moston in January 1896 and is commemorated by a statue outside the library in Fellsworth. Like I said, there used to be a pub, but I believe it's closed down. They had only one child, a daughter called Annie, who sadly died in 1875 at the age of 20. And he wrote a poem in her memory, which was quite, well, I think it was quite sweet from what I can make out of it. Okay, so number 13. This is at Siemens, Manchester Road in Hollingwood, to commemorate Sebastian Pietro Innocenzo Adema Gianni De Franti. Yeah, that's a name. Or just Sebastian De Franti, you know, if you want to keep it easy. So I'm sure many of you know the name.
Yeah.
Not an Oldham lad, born in Liverpool in April 1964, but died in 1930. I think I meant 1864 there. So basically, our Seb was an electrical engineering genius from a very young age. Apparently he invented a new type of streetlight at the age of 13. Okay. At the age of 18, he set up his first company. Sorry, forgot a slide. There he is. There's Seb. Ferranti, Thompson and Ince in 1882. And he was renowned as the UK expert in alternating current. In 1887, he was hired to design Deptford Power Station, and the system he designed then is still in use around the world today. He was president of the Institution of Electrical Engineers. He helped to form the British Electrical and Allied Manufacturers Association in 1911, and in his lifetime he had 176 patents registered for various technologies. He was a genius. So incidentally, his grandson, Basil De Franti, was a Conservative MP for Morecambe and Lonsdale in the 50s and 60s, and his granddaughter, Valerie Hunter-Gordon, invented the disposable nappy. There we go. Quite the inventive family. But why the association with Oldham? Well, this is where he opened his first factory, in Hollingwood. Oh, that's Hertford Works. That's not Ferranti. That's Hertford Works. I don't know what happened. Oh my goodness, I've lost Francie.
No, that's Francis.
Is that Francie?
Yeah.
I suppose
It's down
because
the bottom.
there's no Morrison's there, so I
Well,
can't.
that's Manchester Road going straight up the middle. You've got railway at back and you've got in between there.
So that's Francie.
That's Francis. Gasworks up to the side of the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So,
probably-
this is Francie. This is the, of course, 1896. I'm thinking about, right, anyway. So this is Francie.
So that's not on the motorway.
That's not yet. So
And
this
then
is,
it extended and went up to the side of the railway, didn't it?
I'm not covering myself in glory tonight. I have practiced this, I promise. Let me just throw these together, despite what it looks like. So yes, the Ferranti factory is where the MEN building now stands. And I also mentioned that in a talk last year about a ghost story in my Death in Oldham talk, but not Mr. Ferranti's. As far as I'm aware, his ghost is not there. Okay, so number 14, Patrick Steptoe. And I was a bit disappointed because I saw that and thought, oh, Steptoe and Sons. Even though I don't really remember it, but no, it's another, let's say, probably more important Steptoe. So his plaque is at the Royal Oldham Hospital Maternity Unit. So known as the test tube baby engineer. Patrick, along with Robert Edwards and Jean Purdy, they developed IVF, which led to the birth of Louise Brown, the world's first test tube baby, in July 1978 at Oldham General Hospital. This is definitely a slide of them. Yes, that is definitely a slide of them. That's our Robert there. Sorry, Patrick, Jean, and Robert. And that's Louise. So Patrick was a gynecologist and an obstetrician, Robert was a biologist, and Jean was an embryologist. The three were pioneers who worked to help people unable to have babies to do so. Now, as a result, Robert was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2010. Unfortunately, Patrick and Jean were not awarded the Nobel Prize as they had died, and the award is never given posthumously, which I think is a shame. You know, but yes.
I was a midwife and we were on night duty when Louise Brown was born.
Really?
We were invited to go in the theatre and stand at the back and watch because the mother, she's been from Yorkshire, I think, and he'd had her on antenatal clinic for quite a while, but because the press were all outside,
Yes.
he came in and he took her to theatre at midnight and did the elective section.
Well, you're my new favourite person in this room. Okay.
He was a lovely, lovely man. Very gentle.
Oh.
He was wonderful.
So did you know all three?
No, I knew Mr. Steptoe. We worked on the unit with him.
That is wonderful. This is why I give these talks. That's a wonderful piece of Oldham history sitting right there. You are history.
When we were on the general wards, he had a midwifery sister who worked for him on the unit, and she'd been in the Nazi concentration camps. Sister Neerasil, she was called, and she had a number on her arm, and I had to special her when she was dying. And when she died, the funeral was at Calder's Church, and he walked in front of the coffin up to the Calder's Church from Oldham, and he played the organ.
My goodness.
He was a lovely man.
That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. There will be a blue plaque for you one day. Not soon, I hope. Hopefully 80 years. 80 years. But that's wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank
It
you.
was wonderful.
Oh, but it's adding a bit of, you know, the human story.
All that work he did with those other two, he did at Dr. Kershaw's hospice, what is now the hospice, and he did it in his own free time.
Well, what a wonderful. See, all I knew was he was a gynecologist and obstetrician. That's it. But now we've had the real human side. Thank you so much. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll add that. He was a very nice man. Played the organ and everything. So that is wonderful. Thank you. Love that you've shared that. Right. Sorry, Patrick, but we are moving on to number 15. Joseph Platt, 11 Queen Street, Oldham. I learned a lot about rugby looking at this. Okay, and I still don't massively understand it, but basically, so Joseph, our Joe, Royton lad, and he was the first secretary of Northern Rugby Union, okay? I find the league, union, it's all very confusing, plus it's also called football, so in my defence, I'm allowed to think I just don't, and I've had it explained a million times, but he was the first secretary of Northern Rugby Union. If I get any details wrong, just shout at me. In 1895, the Rugby Football Union refused to allow players to be paid 6 shillings a week to make up for wages lost from their jobs when they were playing rugby. So as a consequence, there was a meeting at a hotel in Huddersfield in August that year, one of the key organisers being Joseph Platt. As a result of this meeting, 22 Northern rugby clubs broke away from the Rugby Football Union and became the Northern Rugby Football Union, which later became Rugby League. I don't understand. But that was a really good thing apparently, and it was a big thing, and Mr. Platt was just massively, massively involved, and he is considered to be the father of Rugby League. He was the first ever secretary of the Northern Rugby Union, served between 1895 and 1920. He was an official at Oldham Rugby League Football Club from 1885 until he died. And incidentally, because I'm imagining like this big, like, oh, rugby, yeah, you know, I don't know, like big guy, he was also managing director of 3 of Oldham's music halls, which I particularly like. So he liked his rugby, but he liked a bit of music as well. I like Joseph, I like the cut of his jib. Okay, number 16, Roy Chadwick.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Engineer, printer.
Absolutely.
Printing machine.
No, not printing machines. So, British Aerospace, Chatterton, that's where his blue plaque is.
Yeah. What's the other, yeah.
Roy
He
did know
designed it,
something.
yeah.
That one out.
He designed
I'll be dining out
Lancaster.
on that. Oh,
Backpedaling
He
now.
designed the walking as well.
So, Roy Chadwick, very dapper gentleman, I think we'll agree. He was born in Widnes in April 1893, died in Cheshire in August 1947, so again not from Oldham, but he worked at Chatterton where the blue plaque is displayed on surviving buildings from Avro, a British aircraft manufacturer. So most famous for designing the Lancaster bomber. Quite a prolific designer, designed many other aircraft, Avro Lincoln, the Avro Pike, the Avro Aldershot, which was the world's largest single-engine bomber, and he was the chief designer at Avro and Chatterton, and sadly, he died along with 3 other crew members when they were doing a test flight on another of his prototypes that took off. It was a prototype Avro Tudor 2, crashed at Woodford Aerodrome in 1947, which is very sad. But yes, very, very important, obviously a massively important part of the war effort for World War II, based at Chatterton. Okay, we're on the final stretch. Number 17, so incorporation is a borough, 1849. There is a plaque. Again, I didn't have time to go down and take a photo, I'm afraid, so there's a blue plaque on there somewhere. So, June the 13th, 1849, one of the most important dates in Oldham's proud history. This is when the charter that incorporated Oldham was officially granted, with the municipal borough of Oldham operating from the 1st November that year. So, many of us I think will be familiar with the date, 1849, but what did that mean? So basically it really meant that Oldham got the freedom to manage its own affairs. It got its own local government, which was responsible for making decisions about Oldham affairs through the elected officials who sat on the council. Also got its own mayor. The first mayor was a chap called William Jones, grandson of a Welsh miner who'd arrived in Manchester in the late 1700s. So not a bad upward trajectory for the James family. And obviously it's still the same council that we have today, who are, I'm sure, all wonderful. Just can never seem to empty my green bin. But, you know, should have got more pressing matters. Number 18, John Bunting. His blue plaque is at 115 Union Street. So he was the largest individual mill owner in Lancashire, but there's surprisingly not a great deal of information available really to find out about him. I was hoping to tell you which mills he owned, don't have those details. I know he lived in Oldham at 115 Union Street, where his blue plaque is placed. He was born in Stockport in 1839, worked as a blacksmith and an engineer, stood him in good stead for when he started his mill empire. He wasn't just an owner of mills, he was quite the entrepreneur, to be fair. He was director of 14 separate companies, and he was known for being able to turn his hand to most things, whether running a successful business or a mill. And from the 1880s, he used that ability. He basically was like an early one of those who goes into businesses that are failing and says, I know what to do, and turns around to make them profitable. And he was known for paying very good dividends to his shareholders. But in personal life, quite a frugal person, another big advocate of temperance. But what I'm hearing here is all these temperate people who didn't drink alcohol, being really rich. Maybe it's all the money they saved, not buying bottles of vodka or, Daniels. Maybe that's it. Now, number 19, and I'm going to be slightly controversial, but Oldham Council, you made a mistake. You made a mistake, you need to update your list. I might email you about it. So, number 19, they have credited the invention of fish and chips. And they have a blue plaque at Tommyfield Market, where it originated. But on their website, they say it commemorates John Lees. John Lees, another Lees. But they're wrong. So, on their list of blue plaques, like I said, the address is given, and I'll show you the plaque in a second, as Tommyfield Market, and there is a blue plaque there about fish and chips. John Lees did have fish and chip shop, and he very proudly, I've got a photo elsewhere, had in the window, like, world's first fish and chip shop, but that's in Mosley, which is not, and as far as I'm aware, never has been part of Oldham. So they cannot be commemorating that one, whether it was the first or not, because that is not Oldham. So whoever put the list up at the council got mixed up. This is our plaque, Tommyfield, home of the first British fried chip. The first chips were fried in Oldham 1860, from which the origins of fish and chip shops and the fast food industries can be traced. So two things there. One, doesn't mention John Lees. Two, I think it's a bit tenuous, if I'm honest. So it does mention the first fried chips, segues into, well, that kind of led to fish and chips. So I'm not saying John Lees is wrong, but I am saying he is not on our blue plaque. He has nothing to do with Oldham. So I just wanted that noted. Thank you. And then the last of our blue plaques, number 20, Bradbury Sewing Machines. This is Park Road near King Street roundabout. And again, so this is one of the plaques that I've driven past when I'm parked up waiting to turn left at the roundabout. And there is a blue plaque there, but from what I've seen out of the car, it actually references Dronsfield Engineers. Now, I've not found a connection yet really with Bradbury Sewing Machines, but if it's out there, I'll find it. So George Francis Bradbury was born in 1827, died in 1884. In 1852, he founded the Bradbury Sewing Machine Company at Primrose Bank in Oldham with his partner T. Sugden. Both men were trained engineers. They later moved to Rhodes Bank and in 1868 opened the Wellington Works in Wellington Street. So Bradbury's is claimed to be the first company in Europe to manufacture sewing machines, the first one in the world having been set up a year earlier in America, the Singer Manufacturing Company. This is a fiddle-based Bradbury No. 2 sewing machine. Oh, that's really weirdly positioned, but you get the gist. I promise I don't throw these together. I think it's beautiful.
Fish deal, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. So as well as manufacturing under the Bradbury name, they also marketed under brand names Wellington and Sewes. In 1882, by 1882, they were producing 500 units a week. By 1887, up to 30,000 units annually were being manufactured. They won an award in 1885 for the invention of the rotary shuttle sewing machine. They also made typewriters, capstan lathes, machine tools, and in 1897 they opened a separate works in Longley Street to manufacture bicycles. And in the early 20th century, they started making motorbikes, and in 1905 sold the sewing machine side of the business to the Jones Sewing Machine Company to concentrate on the production of motorbikes. During the First World War, they provided the British Army with motorbikes and bicycles, but sadly suffered from a post-war slump. The last motorbike rolled off the production line in 1923, and facing, sadly, mounting financial problems, the Bradbury Works closed for good in 1924. But here endeth the first of the 40 Blue Plaques of Oldham. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. Now, if anybody has got 5 minutes, I've got the May minutes from the Institute. If anyone's interested.
Well, that's sewing machines, right?
Yeah, right, okay, yes.
Singer made exactly the same sewing machine.
I'm listening.
Yeah,
I'm just going to try and fix that.
because I've got one at home.
Oh, there we go. I don't know why that had slipped down.
What's a Singer? 1865.
Oh, there we go. Oh, yes, that's a better picture of it.
Yeah.
It's so pretty. It really is.
Yeah, 1865.
But yes, so,
They were built then.
if I may, do a little bit of gossip. There's not huge amounts of gossip in May, in the Institute minutes, but, you know, I work with what I've got. So, very quick overview. May 1929. Now, this was interesting to me. So I don't know what state of disrepair the bank was in, but it was finally agreed that Mr. Woolley would arrange to have it cleaned with the help of S. Smith and R. Mason. I didn't know there was a bank in Bardsley, but clearly there was, because they were concerned about the lack of cleanliness in it. And so it was Mr. Woolley who was going to arrange it. What's the betting that S. Smith and R. Mason were ladies? And Mr. Woolley would just be there going, right, you missed a bit. I don't know, I can't say, I wasn't there. And it was previously, so it had previously been agreed that the time of meetings for the committee members would be moved from 8:30 to 9 p.m. Prompt was written next to it, but this was rescinded for unexplained reasons. Maybe that's a bit too late. And it was also agreed to rescind a rule imposed in July 1922 that junior members would now be allowed the same full use of the Institute as seniors, as long as they adhered to the rules of conduct. So clearly there'd been some juniors misbehaving 7 years ago, but they've finally forgiven them and decided to give them a second chance. So May 1930, lots of talk about the annual gala, agreed it would be held on the 7th of June, members of the gala committee selected, and as they always do, agreed at the next meeting to agree a date for the committee members for the gala to get together. I love it. They never just said, right lads, next Friday, shall we do it? It was always, we'll have another meeting to decide the date of the next meeting. And there was a rather interesting note. It was agreed that no refreshments were to be served in the Institute that were not in keeping with the rules of the Institute. I don't know what people were smuggling in and consuming. It sounds like fun. So May 1931, bit of a theme, there was more discussion about rules. It was moved and agreed that a notice be put up drawing members' attention to the rules of the Institute. So, I mean, there's clearly an awful lot of rowdiness going on at the Institute. Clearly the early 30s was the time to be going there. And it was agreed that only, underlined, the windows of the Institute were to be painted. And they specified it had to be dark stone. And tenders were invited from 2, I think, local painters. May 1933, it was agreed that matters of the billiard table be left over for the time being. I don't know what the problem was, but they weren't about to solve it. And it was also agreed that matters of the electric radiator be left over. But it was also agreed they would speak to the school managers about the heating of the Institute. Now, May 1937, another interesting one, or intriguing. So there was reference to it being Jubilee year. Now, I mentioned this in the March minutes, but I double-checked, and that was 1934, not 1937. So it was clearly some local Jubilees, but I don't know what they're related to. but they wanted to raise funds for the Institute because it was Jubilee, so they agreed a concert by the members of the Operatic Society. And I do have to say, every time they want to raise funds, in like the 6 months I think of it doing this, it's always the Operatic Society that get called out. And I guess you can imagine like dwindling. Oh, we've been to 17 in the last 2 years. Or maybe I'm wrong. But admission was agreed at 6 pence and 4 pence, depending on adult or child, would include refreshments of tea and biscuits. And I love these references. They were going to have a Chara trip, a day out in July. Weekly payments for those wishing to go would be collected on Friday evenings. May 1938, another mention of the annual trip, no details, but they were going to use J.J. Threlfall's motor for transport, date fixed for June 25th. However, there was a special meeting 2 weeks later where they agreed to put the trip back to July 16th. So again, June 16th. It wasn't just a case of, oh, we can't all do that, let's change it. No, we're going to have a meeting so we can document it. And in 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, I'm a historian, not a mathematician. Some historian will be talking about it. So May 1939, agreed a further meeting would be held later in the month to decide upon details for the upcoming trip. But I know I'm mocking, gently teasing, but these trips were clearly very important. So they were putting a lot of work into it. And then the last May minute is in 1947 with another mention of the annual trip. This time we have a destination. It was going to take place on the 5th of July to Matlock, which is a beautiful part of the country. And J.J. Threlfall, clearly still in business as his coach was to be hired again. So that's it. We'll see what they were up to in June next month. Brilliant. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.